welcome to my channel. My name is Martine, and if you're new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights. And I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to see more content from me, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, click on the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video. And also, if you're interested in a private astrological reading, I do readings on a wide variety of topics. You can check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there, and you can email me for a full list of reading options and the prices corresponding to each of them. And also, if you are interested in tarot, I have started a tarot channel more recently than this channel, and I will be linking it in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. Go ahead and check it out. Maybe subscribe if you're interested in tarot. I would greatly appreciate it. And also, last but not least, I have also started memberships on this channel, and I've also done a video to talk about memberships in depth and what each of them entail. And I will be linking that video in the video description, because it's more detailed than the information that you get by just clicking the join button. Yeah, so if you're interested in memberships, meaning extra content that is members only plus a few other perks, go ahead and check it out. Yeah, consider that. I would greatly appreciate it. All right, so without further ado, let me get into today's topic, which is going to be basically an impromptu little rant, because this is not a video that I have planned to do, but it is something that has been weighing heavily on my mind for a long time now. In fact, it is something that I kind of planned to talk about for a very long time, and in some ways I have already sort of touched upon these subjects very lightly in other previous videos. However, I haven't really organized my thoughts properly into a video to really say what I want to say about this topic, and I feel like it has to be said, and I want to give my opinion clearly on this topic. It has to do with one of the main reasons why I love astrology so much and why I have used it for a very long time now. Now that I'm in my 30s, I have been using astrology since I was like probably around 11 to various degrees, right? I've also dabbled in other systems of astrology. If you have read my channel profile or my channel introduction here on YouTube, I have written that initially I started out by learning tropical astrology, which was the one that was readily available to me at the time. But I also dabbled in Chinese astrology and numerology, in Batsa, in Ziwei Dushu, you name it. I mean, I've tried every kind of astrological system, and Vedic astrology is the one that I stick to the most, that I know the most about. So that's why I talk about it on my channel. And I want to tell you some of the things that I've learned from studying astrology. So this video is a little bit of I would say, about a philosophical perspective on astrology, why it is so useful and how it helps in things that literally nothing else can help you with, And this is about the topic of the one size fits for all. And I'm pretty sure, talked about the subject a little bit in a video that I did a while ago, where I talked about the Age of Aquarius. And I mentioned there just briefly that I think one of the best parts about living in the Age of Aquarius, despite the chaos and the maddening speed and, technology and all the challenges that we have in today's world, one of the advantages is the fact that we are slowly, very slowly, but surely going to move away from the mentality of a one-size-fits-for-all. However, paradoxically, there are people who are taking the completely opposite direction, and those are people who are totalitarian-minded, right? So again, not to get too much in depth with this, but the Age of Aquarius is ruled by two main signifiers or planets. One of them is a planet, the other one is not a planet. So one of them is Saturn, and the other one is Rahu, or the north node of the moon. And I have talked about this, how these are the main dichotomous energies that you see in human society in today's world, where on the one hand you have the Saturnians, which are people who are clinging to traditions, they're living in fear, and they want everything to be controlled and organized and, rationed, and, forcing people to, they're basically forcing people into becoming let's say environmentally conscious and waste conscious and all this stuff, instead of actually taking an approach of encouragement and information and all that. They're basically taking on an attitude of totalitarianism in various ways. I've also talked about this in many videos, that Saturn is connected to Abrahamic religions, in my opinion. In fact, any organized religion is connected to Saturn, because Saturn is about the power of the collective, not so much about individual freedom. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have Rahu, which is the complete opposite energy from Saturn, which is all about breaking away from tradition. It's all about embracing individuality, right? It's about embracing freedom, personal freedom, and uniqueness, right? Authenticity and all that, right? So these are the main dichotomous energies that you see constantly butting heads in today's world. But by and large, there are people waking up and understanding that the one size fits for all does not work. And I could talk about this topic forever, because the one size fits for all mentality seeps into every aspect of human existence. But let me just kind of try to organize what I have observed and why I want to talk about this topic, because I think it is so important. And it's one of the reasons why astrology is so worth studying, right? And that is the fact that life is just not the same for everyone. I think about this all the time when I see for instance, when I see dating coaches, for instance, telling people how to behave when it comes to relationships or how to attract a partner, right? To me, a lot of it is absolutely laughable, right? With very few exceptions. There might be some parts of these theories that they are expressing that maybe are generally applicable to every person. Like, for instance, don't burp very loudly on the first date, right? A lot of them just have to do with basic understanding of, common decency. And a lot of them also have to do with understanding biological differences between men and women. However, dating coaches oftentimes overlook that in today's world, but let me not digress too much. But just to, for those of you who are interested, I'm going to be linking a video in the video description where I talked about my views on gender. And just to give you the brief of it, is that I think there are two main components to gender. One of them is spiritual, the other one is biological. And I think people should never confuse the two of them. The biological is the very bare minimum and the basic, right? That's where things like women need security falls into, right? And men need sex more than women. That's what biological differences mean. And so certainly the biological differences are very important, but in addition to that, which is the bare minimum, right? That's the common denominator, because the biological side is the animal side of us that is largely the same with everyone. Largely, right? There are variations, but you're going to largely see the same things. Most women are going to want security in relationships because that is coming from the biological side. However, most of a person and most of what makes an individual is not from the biological. It doesn't come from the animal side of the person, right? So when you have dating coaches, for instance, telling you behave, check these points in order to attract a mate, it's kind of I don't know, let's say the equivalent of telling a dog to behave like a cat in order to attract a mate. Basically, my point being that if you behave in a way that is totally different from your nature, right, on a spiritual plane, when it comes to the things that you care about, when it comes to your authentic self, your values, your principles, the kind of life that you want to live, right, all of these things that don't have to do with the immediate biological needs. All of these things, right? If you just, pretend to be something you're not just to attract a mate, you're only going to be miserable, and you're going to make the other person miserable. Because different people want different things. This is why I laugh, for instance, when I hear people saying things like women want masculine men. And in fact, if you actually open your eyes and your ears and you look online, you oftentimes will see contradicting points of view. And yet everyone is trying to generalize that their point of view is going, it goes for everyone, right? Like, so you see women saying things like, well, modern women today don't want macho men. And then on the other hand, you have other women saying things like, oh, we want manly men, right? The problem is not that, the falsity here is not that some women want manly men and other women want feminine, sensitive, in touch with themselves men. The heresy is to generalize, to say something like, all women want to be with macho, manly men, like, I don't know, Arnold Schwarzenegger or Joe Rogan or The Rock Hudson or whatever, right? That's a gross generalization, because the truth is that a lot of women would not be happy with those kinds of men. So if you are out there, let's say, giving dating advice, and you're telling men, go to the gym and bench 200 pounds and look buff and never show your emotions because that's what's going to get you a girlfriend, that is such complete, utter bullshit, right? Yes, men should understand the differences, the biological differences between men and women, and that women do need a basic sense of security. And I would say that's generally true for all women, whether they want to admit to it or not. That's another totally different topic, right? But at the same time, each individual woman will need something else, right? So a lot of women will care a lot about having a very strong emotional connection with a partner. Other women couldn't care less about the emotional connection. They just want a guy who's rich, right? And who will pay for the bills and make them feel like a delicate princess, right? So other women, some women, again, would like to date an artist, whereas some women will date, a sports person, an athlete, or whatever, right? And then there are various combinations of different things, and the same thing goes for men. And of course, you can easily see this if you have watched any of the videos on my channel where I talk about relationships and archetypes, and especially things like the Dara Karaka, the seventh house, basically all of these things that signify the spouse archetype, quote unquote, or the boyfriend archetype sometimes, or the girlfriend archetype, right, in horoscopes. I've talked about them in multiple videos. I'm going to be linking my relationship astrology videos playlist in the video description, and you can go skim through that, because you're going to find a lot of examples of, and relevant titles about different things that are connected to what I'm talking about right now. And this is just one aspect of it. And actually, yes, and basically what I'm trying to say is, and I have also talked about this in the video that I talked about gender, right? And what astrology has taught me about gender. It's that every person has a certain partner archetype that is signified by a certain planet. And that planet is not always the same thing, right? So if you take two women, for instance, one of them has Mars's Dara Karaka, and maybe, so let's say her spouse archetype is predominantly influenced by Sun and Mars, right? This is the kind of woman that will definitely want a macho man, right? Or like a typical manly man, quote unquote, right? Maybe not macho man. That's not a nice way to put it. Because that's kind of like borderline, what feminists would call toxic masculinity. But, they would want like a typical, let's say something that most people would call a traditionally masculine man. Whereas another woman who has, let's say, Moon and Venus as Dara Karaka, and, Moon and Venus aspecting her partner archetype in the horoscope, this woman could want something totally different, right? She will probably want a guy who writes poems and is romantic and sensuous and patient, and knows how to appease her and how to be supportive emotionally and all that stuff, right? So two different, totally different people. Same thing with men, right? Some men, whether they like to admit it or not, they like women who have stronger masculine energy, right? And what happens in today's world is that you have dating coaches and whatever, like, I don't know, psychologists and all this stuff that do statistics and they do all kinds of shit, and they say things like, well, behave like this to attract a man, behave like this to attract a woman, right? But again, you might be basically like a cat trying to act like a dog, or like basically like an animal pretending to be a different animal. You're probably not going to attract something that is compatible with you. That's what I'm trying to say, basically. And this is just one aspect of it. This is one aspect of the one size fits for all. Actually, not even the main trigger. The main trigger for me was actually life advice, right? Every aspect of life advice. If you listen to anyone, every therapist, every, I don't know, spokesperson, every celebrity, every whatever, any person who's out there, motivational speaker or whatever, all of them, they're giving advice that sounds like a one size fits for all to a large extent, right? Even Teal Swan, I've watched a lot of her videos, and if you analyze her horoscope, a lot of the things that she's saying are actually things that she personally cares about a lot, because these are things that she has experienced a lot in her life, right? That are important themes for her personally, maybe not for the other person, right? And everyone will give you advice from their perspective. This is the problem, and this is why people can end up being lost in life by listening to the wrong advice, right? Because what works for one person is not going to work for you. And this goes for everything. This goes for career. This goes for making friends. This goes for mating the right partner. This goes for, fulfillment overall. This goes for relocation. That's another thing, right? It's like some people will say things like, oh, I hated my country, and it wasn't until I moved abroad that I became successful. And then they go ahead and they advise that to everyone. Oh, leave that country that I came from, because you're going to be much happier if you move abroad. But except bullshit, that's not the way it works. Because if you look at other people's horoscopes, even if they are born in a so-called third world country, they might actually be better off and happier living in their homeland as opposed to trying to move away, right? Just as sometimes you see the opposite situation happening, where you have people born in first world countries, right, that are very developed and economically prosperous, and they move to countries that are poorer, and they are actually happier in those places than in their homeland. And that's because their horoscope shows it. Their horoscope shows you're going to have a happier life if you move abroad. And it also can give indications to which directions are most beneficial to you. And that's a totally different topic for a totally different video, right? Just to give you some examples. But again, the main trigger, I haven't gotten to it. The main trigger for me personally was about career, and just to give you an example, for instance, in my horoscope, I have multiple placements that show I would have sudden loss of jobs, which is exactly what happened to me in the past roughly 10 years. Especially in the past 5 years, I have lost my job, I think 3 or 4 times. Each of those times, it was not because of something that I did. It was due to things like outsourcing, like, downsizing, like basically all forms of corporate BS, right? And for instance, what happened to me is when I would get advice from people from my family, for instance, who don't give a shit about astrology, and, I won't get into it, but we don't even have that great of a relationship. But it's like for instance, my parents, for instance, they worked for the same place of employment for 30 years, over 30 years, and then they retired, so they cannot possibly understand how I would, how I switched 10 jobs in the past 7 years, right? Actually, I don't think it's 10 jobs. I kind of exaggerated. I don't know how many it is, but it's like about 7, 8 jobs in the past, 7, 8 years, right? So, and this is because in my horoscope, I have the 12th house, the 8th house, the moon heavily aspecting my 10th house. And on top of, and also Rahu, and I'm going through the Rahu Mahadasha. So if you know about astrology, you understand why these placements would cause something like sudden loss, especially the 12th house being connected to the 10th house, for instance, or the 6th house, can show sudden losses in career, right? And my parents, for instance, both of them, they have Jupiter in the 6th house. Neither of them have any connections between the 12th house and the 10th house or the 6th house, right? So they don't understand how someone can, go through so much bad luck that they happen to lose their job, repeatedly, because they've never had to go through it, right? And the reason they've never had to go through it is because, I'm sorry to be fatalistic, it's because it's not shown in their horoscope. It wasn't something that they were even meant to experience, Another example is when I got my place, for instance, I've had another member of my family advise me to, get a mortgage, don't worry about it. And not that I regret it, by the way, but just to put things into perspective for you. At the time, my salary wasn't great, but I had managed to save enough for a down payment. And I had a person like, oh, don't worry that, your mortgage is going to increase, but your income is going to increase as well. And this is because this person, my older sister, this is who the person is, she, for instance, she actually had that trajectory, right? Because in her horoscope, again, she has a steady climb in her career. She's very Saturnian, for instance, right? So she has a steady climb in her career, and that's exactly what happened for her. She started out, with a relatively just regular office job, and her salary kept increasing over the years, and she just gained more seniority, and more money over time. However, in my horoscope, it's a totally different situation. In fact, I have multiple placements in my horoscope that, number one, show that employment is not how I'm meant to make the big bucks. Basically, again, this is a topic that is highly debated in the astrological communities, and for good reason, because not everyone is meant to be an employee. That's the truth. Now, of course, I haven't actually figured out how to not be an employee and successfully support myself, but I am working on that. Hopefully, fingers crossed, at some point I will reach the promised land. But the bottom line is, I have actually had that, and not only in my Vedic astrology, also in my Batsa, in my Chinese astrology, I have multiple signifiers, multiple indicators that I am just not a great employee. And nobody else in my family has this kind of energy, right? So it's very difficult for them, especially for my parents, for my older sister, who were, staying in jobs my sister did change her job, but my parents didn't. They also grew up in a totally different time and place and during communism. But even after communism, they were some of the few people who didn't lose their jobs, right? Who weren't forced to leave their jobs. And that's because their horoscope really supports them being employed, and also supports a lot of luck with respect to employment, right? Having Jupiter in the 6th house, both of them. But going back to my sister, so when it was this question of like, oh, don't worry about it, you're gonna, buy the place because your salary will increase. Well, guess what? In my horoscope, I have a lot of placements that show fluctuations in income, which is exactly what happened to me in the past, again, roughly 5-6 years, where, there were times when I lost my job. I went from some, like the job that I had, for instance, 4 years ago paid almost double by comparison to the job that I have right now. There were also times where I was basically forced to live off my savings because I had lost my job and I was out of work for a few months, right? Now, if I had known all of these things from the beginning, if I had looked at this, roughly 5-6 years ago when I bought my place, would it actually have deterred me from taking on a mortgage? Probably not. But what it would have made a difference with is the way that I manage my finances. Because when I got, for instance, the first high-paying job, I did what most idiots do, which is that I started overspending. Instead of saving the money that I had extra, I started spending more money on takeout and jewelry and crap that I didn't really need, which is really the worst thing that you can do. But that was because I was naive enough to think, oh, all right, I've reached this level of salary and I'm not going to go back to having a lower salary, which is a huge mistake, especially if you have certain placements in your horoscope, such as the ones that I have in the D1, in the D9, sometimes even in other divisional charts, that basically hints to the fact that there will be fluctuations with respect to your income and with respect to your luck in career, right? Which I also have. So this is an example. Another example, and yes, I'm using myself as an example because I'm the person whose life I know the best, right? But I can think of countless other people that, same situation, right? Let's say a person who has strong placements in Revati Nakshatra. I've talked about Revati Nakshatra in Mercury's Nakshatras, for instance. If you're curious to check out more information about that, maybe I'll link it in the video description. So I talked about how Revati is connected to luck when traveling, for instance, and also a kind of naivete and a kind of tendency to be rather entitled with respect to their luck in life, because Revatis can actually have a gift for attracting luck and lucky circumstances and good timing, especially situations of good timing. And I've actually come across a lot of people who have, a lot, definitely a few, like a handful, let's say, of people who have strong Revati placements who travel a lot and they never have any problems when traveling. They're very much at ease when traveling. And that's because Revati is very much connected to smooth travels and luck when traveling and all this stuff. And so what happens is a person like this who has strong Revati placements will often give advice that sounds like, oh, everyone should travel, or they will look down upon people who are bad at traveling, right? Or who are maybe fearful of traveling, or people who travel and as soon as they leave the house, it's like something bad happens to them. And the Revati person is not going to be able to understand why this is happening, because for them, it's like the world opens up for them as soon as they leave the home and they travel abroad. It's like everything works out in their favor, right? And this is because people systematically fail to realize that a lot of things that are happening in life are basically, and I don't want to use the word predetermined, but to some extent they are predetermined, right? Everyone has certain areas of life that are going to be easier for them and certain areas of life that are going to be more difficult, And the problem is, again, these one-size-fits-for-all pieces of advice, they don't work, right? If you listen to, let's say, travel vloggers who say things like, oh, just quit your job and move to another end of the earth and you're going to be happily ever after, that is not going to work for everyone. Again, and you will probably see it in the horoscope. You have to check if you are actually going to have better luck moving abroad. Again, maybe if you have Revati placements, who knows? That's one thing to look at, right? All kinds of things, right? Another example, let me think, is, again, with respect to friends. This is one of the things that irked me most in my life, because I actually have, again, one of those horoscopes that I just don't have strong friendships. And it is written in my horoscope, in both my Vedic horoscope as well as in the Chinese astrology. And throughout my life, I've had people try to push me to be more friendly, to, quote, get out of my shell. Now, don't get me wrong. If you have certain difficult placements, it doesn't mean that you have to spend the rest of your life being grumpy and not trying to relate to anyone and, I don't know, never communicating. It doesn't mean you have to be a total shut-in. However, if you have certain placements in your horoscope, people fail to realize, especially the people who don't have these placements, that it's just never going to be easy for you to make friends. I can tell you this right now. If you have Saturn in the 11th house, especially in the D1 or the D9 chart, you're not going to be able to make friends very easily, unless there are other much more positive aspects influencing that situation, more positive planets as well. But mostly, you're not going to make a lot of friends, right? And then what you see when you open up channels that, let's say, give life advice, right? They give you advice on how to be happier in life. And they'll say things like, oh, just go out and talk to people and be friends. But they fail to realize that that just doesn't work for some people. I cannot tell you, especially when I was young, how often I would beat myself up and feel like there was something wrong with me because I couldn't make friends like other people. And then once I reached somewhere in my early to mid 20s, I got into really more in depth into astrology, and I really got into Vedic astrology, and I also got into Chinese astrology, into Ziwei Doshu. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, right? That actually confirmed a lot of the things that I knew intuitively my whole life, that I am just not meant to have strong friendships in this life. In fact, to a large extent, my horoscope shows that I am meant to test my willpower, and I'm not meant to rely on other people's support. So that's why, to a large extent, friendships, at least for a large portion of my life, maybe not forever, were denied for me, because I was not meant to have a lot of emotional support. I was not meant to have strong friendships, right? Because if I did have these things, I wouldn't have reached the level of understanding of the world that I have reached right now. Because I've talked about this also in the Archetypes of Ketu video that I did, that if you grow up in suffering and you have deprivations on various levels, you have a much higher understanding of the world, and you have a higher intuition and, empathy and all this, because a lot of things are denied to you, right? Whereas a person who has everything that they want just being handed to them on a silver platter, or everything comes easy to them, these people don't really have to question their environments. They don't have to sit and study things and maybe get into something like astrology to make sense of the world around them and why things don't work out for them, right? Because if everything comes easily to you, you don't have to ask yourself questions. You're just out there, enjoying the ride, basically, right? That's one thing. All right. So this has been kind of like a long rant, and I could talk about this. Like I said, I could talk about this for a long time because there are many examples of this. Of course, a great one is also health in general, not even necessarily connected to astrology, but astrology can also play a part in medical astrology. But you see this in the world all the time, the one size fits for all being shoved down people's throats, right? People who are out there saying that everyone should go vegan because, oh, it's so wonderful. I tried to go vegan like 3 times, and each time I thought I was going to die after the second week. And it's, and then I came across studies that said clearly that not everyone is meant to thrive on that diet, right? And it's like, it's like one man's treasure is another man's trash, or like the other way around. One man's trash is another man's treasure. Well, guess what? It's like one man's poison could be another man's nourishment, right? When you're talking about diets, for instance, and anything else in life, right? And this is how and another very important factor that is to be taken into account with respect to all of these things, these life advice things, is the Arudha Lagna that I have talked about repeatedly, on my channel. And again, I might be linking that playlist in the video description. I talked about that, how people will just perceive you differently based on the energies that you have in your Arudha Lagna, right? So again, speaking of the friendship topic, if you have Mars in the Arudha Lagna, you can be the friendliest person ever. People are still not going to want to be your friends. Most of the time, because they will perceive you to be threatening. They will perceive you to be someone who is selfish and out for yourself, no matter how nice you are. And if you try to act nice, they will see you as fake. Or they will see you as this person is just plotting strategies, right? But again, have fun explaining this to someone who really doesn't know anything about astrology and thinks that, you're just delusional, you're making things up, or that you're making excuses, or God knows what, right? All kinds of bullshit, right? When I look at the horoscopes, every single time I've looked at the horoscopes of people who have, let's say, relative popularity or friends, or, they easily seem to make friends, for instance, these people oftentimes don't have, not oftentimes, all the time, I would say, do not have, first of all, they do not have certain configurations in their horoscopes that suggest difficulties in making friends. And second of all, and equally important, they often don't have any planets in the Arudha Lagna, or they don't have any malefic planets aspecting the Arudha Lagna. Why? Because people who have malefics aspecting the Aruda Lagna, especially in the Aruda Lagna, or aspecting the Aruda Lagna in itself, these people elicit very strong emotional responses. So it's not easy to be friends with someone like this, because they become controversial, especially in this bullshit Saturnian narcissistic world that we live in, where everyone is careful about, oh, I need to make friends with someone who's going to make me look good on Instagram, right? Nobody wants to be friends with someone who's controversial, right? I remember I actually heard this being said by Teal Swan in one of the videos that in the interviews that she gave, that she said she had famous people, either her interviews or one of her books, I think. I've read a couple of her books. And she said she has famous people who come to her for advice who would never be, open about asking her for advice or seeking her counseling or anything like that, because she is such a controversial person that they don't want to be associated with her, right? And that's because, again, Teal Swan has Aruda Lagna in Aries opposite Saturn and Mars, which are two malefics, right? Another example of very controversial person, Donald Trump, who also has Mars in the 7th from the Aruda Lagna. This is why it's impossible for people to be lukewarm about him. They either love him or hate him, right? And if you look at the people who are in politics today, most of them are, they don't have any planets in the Aruda Lagna, right? So they look relatively harmless on the surface, and it's very important to understand that it's only an illusion, right? But let me not get into politics, because then I'm definitely never going to end this video, like recording. All right, so basically, yes, this has been a long rant, but it's something that I just come across all the time, and it's come to my attention more and more lately, and I think it's something that everyone should take into account, because, it's like, don't assume that other people's advice is right for you. You can find pieces of advice, mix and match the right pieces of advice that feel right to you, but don't think that, oh, it's like if Mel Robbins tells you, you need to wake up at 6 a.m. and that's going to bring you success in life. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work for everyone, It's just a minor example, but there are countless of them, like I said, with dating, with careers, with anything to do with how to live your life, right? Yeah, so this is pretty much what I wanted to say, and I hope that you have enjoyed. Thank you very much for listening to my rant, and I hope that you have enjoyed it. And if you have, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel, please, because the majority of people who watch my videos on a regular basis are still not subscribed to my channel. So yes, please subscribe. It is free. It will only take a second, and yes, it's the easiest way to support my channel. And also, please comment in the comment section if you have anything you would care to share, any commentary on this topic or others in particular that you want to share. Please feel free to comment. And yes, if you're interested in a personal reading, I do personal consultations with respect to a wide variety of topics. You can check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there. And I will also leave a video about memberships for those of you who are interested. I have 2 levels, actually 3 levels of membership, 2 of which imply exclusive members only videos. And I have also made a video to explain the memberships more in depth. And I will be showing them in the video description. So go ahead, check out the video if you're curious about memberships. And also, last but not least, I have a tarot channel that I have started more recently than this channel. And if you're interested in tarot, go ahead and check it out. Maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. I'm going to be linking it in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you at my next video. Bye.